Imagine a man who seems to have it all. He's the perfect gentleman, good-looking, well-spoken, educated in law, and armed with a smile that could charm anyone. He even worked the phones at a suicide hotline, saving lives. But beneath the blue eyes and the charm, he was hiding one of the darkest, most vicious monsters America has ever seen. This was a man who wore a cast to fake an injury, gained the trust of women, and then led them to their doom. Today, we're deep diving into the case of a killer who was told by his own judge, "You could have been an extraordinary lawyer, but you chose a different path." We are looking at the life, the crimes, and the execution of Theodore Robert Bundy, a man whose name became synonymous with the devil himself. The story of Theodore Robert Cowell began not in a warm, loving home, but under the heavy shadow of a deep shame. It was November the 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His birthplace was the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers, a place where young women went to hide their sins from the prying eyes of society. In the conservative America of the 1940s, having a child out of wedlock wasn't just a mistake. It was a social stigma capable of shattering a family's future. The identity of Ted's biological father remains the first unsolved mystery of his life. Names like Lloyd Marshall or Jack Worthington appear in the records, but Ted never met him. He was born with his mother's surname, Cowell, but Louise, Ted's mother, couldn't bring him back home without executing a cruel deception. To save face within their church and neighborhood, Ted's grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, concocted a massive lie. They brought Ted home and raised him as their own son. Louise, his biological mother, was forced to play the role of his older sister. It was a twisted family charade, with little Ted cast as the unwitting protagonist. But his grandfather's house was no safe haven. Samuel Cowell was a man psychologists would later identify as the root of Ted's pathology. Though a gardener by trade at home, he was a tyrant. He was a man of explosive, uncontrollable rage who harbored deep hatred for minorities and abused animals, even reportedly swinging cats by their tail. Ted's grandmother, Eleanor, was a deeply depressed and subservient woman who underwent electroconvulsive therapy and was too terrified of Samuel to even speak up. Ted grew up in an atmosphere where violence was the language of power and women were viewed as weak, perpetual victims. Was it here, in these formative years, that Ted learned that manhood meant dominance over women? The red flags appeared much sooner than you might think. One of the most chilling family anecdotes comes from when Ted was just 3 years old. His aunt Julia recalled waking up to find her covers pulled back. When she opened her eyes, she saw a scene that made her blood run cold. There stood little Ted, smiling innocently by the bedside. But arranged around Julia's body were butcher knives from the kitchen, blades pointed inward. This wasn't just child's play. It was the first rehearsal of a sinister mind. In 1951, Louise finally escaped that toxic environment, taking Ted to Tacoma, Washington to start a new life. There, she met and married a kind-hearted man named Johnny Bundy. Johnny formally adopted Ted, giving him his surname and trying to be a father figure, taking him on camping trips and offering affection. But Ted never accepted him. He later admitted he viewed Johnny as weak and unintelligent simply because he wasn't wealthy. Even as a teenager, Ted considered himself superior to the working class. And then the moment of truth arrived. The moment the ticking time bomb within Ted's psyche finally detonated. Accounts vary, but the prevailing theory is that in his early teens, while searching for documents or after a taunt from a relative, he stumbled upon his original birth certificate. Father: unknown. Mother: Louise Cowell, the woman he thought was his sister. Imagine realizing your entire reality, your very identity, was built on a lie. The person you called sister was your mother. Your parents were your grandparents. Criminal psychologists believe this was the turning point that extinguished any capacity for trust in Ted. He felt humiliated. He had been branded a bastard. This betrayal mixed toxically with his grandfather's violent genetics. He learned that human appearances are deceptive, so he decided to craft a mask of his own. On the outside, a polite, well-dressed, shy boy, but on the inside, a petty thief and a peeping Tom, peering into windows at undressed women, fantasizing about revenge against a world that had deceived him. It was the spring of 1967 at the University of Washington. Ted Bundy was a young man who always felt like an outsider looking in on the world of the elite. Yet he was desperate to belong to it. It was during these days that he met the woman who would alter the trajectory of his life forever. In the case files, she is known as Diane Edwards, a girl from a wealthy California family. Diane was everything Ted aspired to be: beautiful, sophisticated, confident, and driving a stylish car. She was the living embodiment of the American dream. To Ted, Diane was more than just a girlfriend. She was a trophy, a symbol proving that he had finally escaped his dark, illegitimate origins. Ted fell madly in love. He bent over backward to be the ideal suitor, cooking for her and mimicking the behaviors of a wealthy gentleman. But there was a glaring problem. Diane was sharp. She could see behind Ted's mask. She sensed a lack of direction, financial instability, and an absence of the maturity required to fit into her upper-class social circle. In 1968, following her graduation, Diane delivered the final blow. She ended the relationship. She told Ted explicitly, "You aren't husband material. You have no future." These words didn't just break Ted's heart, they shattered his ego. He later admitted the breakup devastated him, triggering the same deep sense of humiliation he felt when he discovered his illegitimate birth. But Ted Bundy didn't wallow in self-pity. He decided to be reborn, not to become a better man, but to prove Diane wrong. He wanted to win her back, solely for the pleasure of discarding her himself. The transformation began. The aimless drifter died, replaced by the new Ted Bundy. He re-enrolled in college, this time as a psychology major, becoming an honor student with stellar grades. Why psychology? Perhaps to learn the mechanics of manipulation. He entered politics, working on the campaign for Washington's Republican governor, Dan Evans. He mastered the art of dressing, smiling, and shaking hands with power players. He even received a commendation for chasing down a purse snatcher. Picture that, a future serial killer apprehending a thief. Ted was now a law student, handsome, charismatic, and seemingly destined for political greatness. He had manufactured himself into the exact man Diane had always wanted. In 1973, Ted traveled to California to see Diane. The transformation left her stunned. The shy, broke boy of the past was now a powerful, attractive man. Diane's calculus changed. She fell in love all over again. This time, she was the one chasing him. The relationship reignited. Letters were exchanged, marriage was discussed, and Ted even paraded her at formal political galas as his fiancée. Diane was completely hooked, believing she had found her soulmate. Ted had reached the summit. He had achieved the impossible, but his goal wasn't love. It was the hunt. Narrator. Then, at the height of Diane's devotion, absolute silence fell. Ted stopped answering calls. Letters went unreturned. Distraught and confused, Diane finally managed to get him on the phone. Through tears, she asked, "Ted, what is happening? Why are you doing this?" Ted's response is one of the most chilling lines in criminal psychology. In a flat, emotionless voice, he simply said, "Diane, I have no idea what you're talking about." And he hung up. He discarded her like garbage. He later told friends, "I just wanted to prove to myself that I could have her." The revenge was complete. Ted had killed Diane psychologically, but the fire inside him didn't subside. FBI profilers believe that Diane Edwards was the only woman Ted truly desired, but could never fully control. And this was the beginning of the nightmare. If you look at the photos of Ted Bundy's victims, a terrifying pattern emerges. Almost every girl he murdered after this point bore a striking resemblance to Diane. White, beautiful, college-educated, with long brown hair parted down the middle. In reality, Ted Bundy was killing Diane over and over again. The first time, he destroyed her spirit. The dozens of times that followed, he destroyed the bodies of innocent women whose only crime was looking like the killer's first love. In Washington State, 1974 wasn't just another year on the calendar. It marked the dawn of a dark era, an era where the word safety lost all meaning. Until then, Seattle was a quiet city where people left their front doors unlocked and female students walked campus paths without a second thought. But suddenly, the silence of the Seattle nights was shattered by screams that were never heard. An invisible phantom was prowling the city, leaving no trace behind, except for empty beds and families waiting for daughters who would never come home. The first piece of this horrifying puzzle was placed on January 31st, 1974. Linda Ann Healy was 21 years old, an honor student, and a weather reporter for the radio. She was known for being meticulous and organized. The next morning, when Linda didn't appear at the breakfast table, her parents grew worried and checked her room. What they found was stranger than her absence. Her bed was perfectly made. The sheets were tucked in with precision. Everything was in its place. But when her mother pulled back the covers, a bloody secret was revealed. A large blood stain on the pillow and a blood-soaked nightgown hidden deep in the closet. Linda hadn't run away. She had been taken. The killer was so cold-blooded that after knocking his victim unconscious, he had stayed to make the bed just to buy himself time. This was Ted Bundy's signature, order amidst the madness. As the weather warmed, the predator's appetite grew, but he shifted his strategy. He was no longer a shadow in the night. He began hunting brazenly in broad daylight, in crowded places. Police were baffled by a confusing pattern. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a handsome, charming man on college campuses or in parks. A man who looked completely harmless but appeared injured. Sometimes his arm was in a cast and he wore a sling. Other times he leaned on crutches, limping. This was Ted Bundy's deadliest weapon, the sympathy ploy. He would wait for young, kind-hearted women, then struggling with an armful of heavy books, or trying to load a sailboat onto the roof of his Volkswagen Beetle. He would theatrically drop the books or pretend his broken arm prevented him from finishing the task. Seeing this attractive, helpless man, the women would approach him, driven by their natural instinct to help. "Sir, do you need a hand?" That was the last sentence many of them would ever speak. Ted would smile, thank them, and lead them to his car. A car where the passenger seat had been removed to create space to hide a human body. The moment the innocent girl bent over to place the books inside, the mask of the gentleman fell away. Ted would strike a crushing blow to the victim's skull with a tire iron or crowbar hidden under the seat. Instant unconsciousness. He would toss her in, handcuff her, and drive away with absolute composure. It all happened in seconds, right in plain sight, yet no one noticed a thing. The crescendo of this terror arrived on a sunny day, July 14th, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park. Over 40,000 people were there enjoying the day. Ted Bundy was there too, with a cast on his arm and a deceptive smile. In less than 4 hours, amidst that massive crowd, he abducted 2 women, Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. His audacity was unbelievable. He had even approached several other women who, fortunately, had declined his request for help. That same day, the police received their biggest break. Multiple witnesses told police they saw a young man with wavy hair introducing himself with a name, a short name that sent shivers down the spine of Seattle. Ted. Just that. A man named Ted, driving a light-colored Volkswagen Beetle. The Seattle police were flooded with calls. Thousands of people called to report the Teds they knew. Even Ted Bundy's fiancée, Elizabeth, called the police, stating that her boyfriend was acting strangely and drove a Volkswagen. But Bundy had such a respectable facade that the police couldn't fathom that an honor student in law could be the monster crushing women's skulls. While the police were drowning in a mountain of files, Ted Bundy packed his bags. He had bled Seattle dry, and now he was thirsty for new hunting grounds. The first chapter of the crimes was over, but the nightmare was only just beginning. Autumn, 1974. The heat in Seattle had become suffocating for Ted Bundy. The police were scouring the city for a Volkswagen Beetle and a man named Ted. He needed a new hunting ground. Ted Bundy left Seattle, accepting a spot at the University of Utah Law School in Salt Lake City. He believed he was too smart to get caught. He thought that by crossing state lines, he could simply erase his past. But he was wrong. Ted could change his zip code, but he couldn't leave the bloodthirsty monster behind. In Utah, he was a loner, a stranger, and that dark force inside him had awakened once again. The killings resumed, but this time, fate had a different plan for him. Scene 1. A Date with the Devil. The story of Carol Durant. November 8th, 1974. A rainy, dreary night. Carol Durant, a shy 18-year-old girl, was strolling through the Fashion Place Mall. Suddenly, a handsome man with a concerned look on his face approached her. He introduced himself as Officer Roseland and quickly flashed a gold badge. With a tone that was authoritative yet compassionate, he told Carol, "Miss, it looks like someone tried to break into your car with a crowbar. We've apprehended a suspect, and we need you to come identify him." Carol was apprehensive, but she trusted the officer. She followed him to the parking lot. But when they reached his vehicle, Carol was confused. It wasn't a squad car. It was a battered, dirty Volkswagen Beetle. Ted, radiating confidence, said, "This is my personal vehicle, don't worry." Carol got in. That was the moment the trap snapped shut. Ted started the engine and drove toward the police station, but suddenly he veered off route, turning into a dark, quiet side street. He slammed on the brakes. A heavy silence filled the car. Suddenly, Ted turned. The kind face of Officer Roseland vanished, replaced by the cold, dead stare of a killer. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs and lunged for Carol's wrists. He managed to lock one cuff onto her right wrist, but Carol had no intention of dying without a fight. She screamed and fought with every ounce of strength she had. Ted pulled a gun and threatened her. "Shut up, or I'll blow your brains out." But Carol knew that staying in that car meant certain death. She clawed at Ted's face, kicked him, and just as Ted raised a tire iron to deliver the fatal blow, Carol managed to fumble with the door handle, throw it open, and hurl herself out onto the pavement. She survived. Carol Durant was the first victim to ever escape Ted Bundy's clutches. She flagged down a passing motorist and was saved. Now, the Utah police had something the Seattle police didn't: a living witness. Someone who had seen the killer's face, heard his voice, and even had traces of Ted Bundy's Type O blood on her coat. Scene 2, the end of the line. The accidental arrest. But Ted didn't stop. Even on the very night Carol escaped, he abducted and murdered another girl named Debbie Kent. His hunger was insatiable. Months passed. It was August 1975, 2:30 a.m. Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward was cruising through a residential neighborhood in the suburbs of Salt Lake City. He noticed a Volkswagen Beetle moving slowly through the alleyways with its headlights off. Officer Hayward flipped on his lights. The driver's reaction was immediate and suspicious. Instead of pulling over, he floored the gas pedal and tried to flee. A short pursuit ensued, and the Volkswagen finally screeched to a halt at a gas station. Officer Hayward approached the vehicle and demanded identification. The name on the license: Theodore Robert Bundy. The officer noticed something strange. The passenger seat had been removed, leaving the floor of the car completely bare. It was bizarre. Why would anyone rip out their car seat? Hayward's police intuition, his sixth sense, told him this was more than a simple traffic violation. He ordered a search of the vehicle. When the trunk popped open, Officer Hayward was staring at what would later be known as the murder kit. A complete toolkit for torture and death. A mask made from pantyhose to cover the face. A heavy crowbar. Ropes and handcuffs. Large trash bags. And an ice pick. Ted Bundy offered a nervous smile, trying to explain that these were just camping supplies. But Officer Hayward wasn't buying it. The cuffs went on. America's most prolific predator was caught not by elite FBI profilers, nor in a complex sting operation, but by a simple beat cop on a routine patrol, all because of a dark headlight. Ted Bundy was in custody. He thought he could talk his way out of this mess with his charm. But he didn't know that Carol Durant was ready to point the finger at him and say, "That is the man." The end of Ted Bundy's freedom had finally arrived. If you thought Ted Bundy's arrest was the end of the story, you are sorely mistaken. To Ted's calculating mind, prison bars were merely temporary inconveniences, not a finale. He was a narcissist who deeply believed he was smarter than every cop, judge, and jailer in the system. And unfortunately, for a while, he proved he was right. Ted Bundy escaped, not once, but twice, making a complete mockery of the American justice system. Escape 1. The Leap to Freedom, Aspen, Colorado, June 1977. June 1977. Ted Bundy was transferred to the small resort town of Aspen, Colorado, to stand trial for murder. Being a former law student, Ted made a bold legal move. He fired his attorneys and petitioned the court to represent himself. The judge agreed. This meant Ted was no longer just a prisoner. He was part of the legal team. Consequently, guards were not allowed to handcuff or shackle him in the courthouse, and he was granted access to the law library to study his case. June 7th, during a court recess, Ted asked the guard for permission to do some research in the library. The guard left him inside and stood outside the door. Ted walked in, headed straight for the window, and looked down. It was a drop of about 30 feet, 9 meters. Without a moment's hesitation, Ted threw the window open and jumped. He hit the ground hard, injuring his ankle, but the adrenaline masked the pain. He limped away, weaving through unsuspecting tourists, and vanished into the dense mountain forests. When the guard entered the library 10 minutes later, all he found was an open window. The bird had flown. Ted wandered the wild Aspen Mountains for 6 days. He had no plan for what came after the jump. The freezing cold, hunger, and his throbbing ankle finally broke him. He eventually tried to steal a car, but his erratic driving caught the attention of police, and he was back in cuffs. This escape was a failure, but it sent a clear message. Ted Bundy would never stop. Escape 2, an engineering masterpiece. Glenwood Springs, December 1977. After the first escape, authorities moved Ted to the Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs, a facility that was supposed to be impenetrable. But Ted Bundy had months to stare at his cell ceiling and plot. He noticed a major design flaw, a square light fixture in the ceiling. If he could remove that fixture, he could access the crawl space, the hollow area between the ceiling and the roof. But there was a catch. The hole was tiny. Ted's solution: starvation. Ted went on a diet. For months, he ate barely enough to survive, slimming his body down until he was skeletal enough to squeeze through that narrow gap. Simultaneously, through visitors, he managed to acquire a small hacksaw and floor plans of the jail. He rehearsed at night. He would climb onto his bunk, open the fixture, and crawl into the dark, dusty crawl space to memorize the route. He memorized the squeaks of the floorboards and the routine of the guards. December 30th, 1977, New Year's Eve weekend. While most of the staff were on holiday leave and the remaining skeleton crew was distracted, a gaunt Ted Bundy arranged his books under his blanket to create a dummy, making it look like he was asleep. He climbed up into the ceiling. Like a spider, he crawled through the tight, dark space above the other inmates. Dust clogged his throat, but he pushed on until he reached a trap door located directly above the closet in the chief jailer's apartment. The jailer and his wife were out to dinner. Ted dropped down, changed into the jailer's street clothes, and walked out the front door with absolute composure, disappearing into the winter night. By the time the guards realized the next morning that Ted was just a pile of books under a blanket, he was already hundreds of miles away. He caught a bus to Denver, then boarded a plane to Chicago. Ted Bundy was free. He was out among the public, perhaps sitting right next to you on the bus or the train. But this time, he didn't want to hide. He was furious. He was thirsty for revenge against the entire gender that he felt had wronged him. Ted bought a one-way ticket to a warm, sunny destination. A destination that was about to be drenched in blood: Florida. This was where the most savage chapter in the book of Ted Bundy would be written. Winter, 1978. Ted Bundy had arrived in Tallahassee, Florida. But this was not the same Ted Bundy, the charming law student we knew in Seattle. The prison escapes, the life on the run, and the starvation had fractured his psyche. He was no longer playing the role of the gentleman. He was enraged. It was a blind fury born of isolation. He rented a small room near Florida State University, FSU, introducing himself as Chris Hagen. But under the cover of night, he was purely a predator, sharpening his teeth for the kill. His control over his impulses had evaporated. Where he once planned murders for months, his madness was now instantaneous. Scene 1. 15 Minutes in Hell. The Chi Omega Massacre. The early hours of Sunday, January 15, 1978. It was Super Bowl night and most students were asleep. Around 3 a.m., Ted Bundy slipped into the Chi Omega sorority house like a phantom through the back door. He carried no firearm. His weapon was a heavy oak log, firewood, he had grabbed from the yard. And, of course, his teeth. What transpired over the next 15 minutes was not just murder, it was absolute carnage. First, he entered the room of Margaret Bowman, 21. Ted attacked her in her sleep, crushing her skull with the oak log. He then strangled her with a ligature made from nylon pantyhose. Margaret never woke up. He immediately moved to the next room, where Lisa Levy, 20, lay sleeping. The attack on Lisa was Ted's most savage act. He didn't just take her life. In a fit of animalistic rage, he bit her body. The bite mark Ted Bundy left on Lisa remained, a bloody signature that would eventually become his death warrant. Ted didn't stop. He moved to a third room, attacking Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler. He broke Kathy's jaw and split open Karen's skull. These two girls survived, and do you know what saved them? The beam of a car headlight. Nita Neary's boyfriend had just arrived to drop her off, and as headlights swept across the room, spooked, Ted dropped his weapon and fled. All of this happened in just 15 minutes. By the time police arrived, the Chi Omega house had been transformed into a morgue. Ted Bundy was no longer the silent killer. He was a ticking time bomb. Scene 2. Innocence Lost. The abduction of Kimberly Leach. Florida police were in shock, but Ted Bundy's hunger wasn't satisfied. 3 weeks later, on February 9th, he committed his final and perhaps most gut-wrenching crime. He traveled to Lake City. This time, his target wasn't a college student. Kimberly Leach was a 12-year-old middle school student. She had left her classroom to retrieve a forgotten purse. She never returned. Ted Bundy lured her into his vehicle right in front of the school. Witnesses reported seeing a man forcing a crying girl into a white van. Kimberly's body was found weeks later in a hog shed. This murder proved that Ted Bundy had reached the depths of depravity. He had no red lines left. He simply wanted to kill. Scene 3. End of the line. The arrest in Pensacola. February 15, 1978, Pensacola, Western Florida. 1 a.m. Police officer David Lee noticed an orange Volkswagen Bug. The license plates didn't match the car. It was stolen. Ted Bundy was behind the wheel. He knew that if he was caught this time, the electric chair was waiting for him. When Officer Lee ordered him to stop, Ted didn't run immediately. He braked. But as the officer approached, Ted suddenly attacked. Ted Bundy fought with everything he had. He struck Officer Lee and tried to wrestle the officer's gun away to escape. Ted was screaming and running. Officer Lee fired a warning shot and then tackled Ted. sweeping his legs and slamming him to the ground. The struggle was intense, but finally, the handcuffs of the law were locked onto Ted Bundy's wrists for good. When they hauled him to the holding cell and his true identity was revealed, a battered and exhausted Ted whispered a sentence to the officer that revealed the depth of his despair. "I wish you had killed me." Narrator: the game was over. The man who had escaped 2 maximum security prisons, terrorized 30 states, and murdered dozens of women had finally reached the end of the road. But Ted Bundy had one last card to play: the trial. It was the stage where he intended to perform the final grand act of his life, keeping the whole world glued to their television screens. The year was 1979. America was glued to its television screens. Ted Bundy's trial in Miami was more than just a legal proceeding. It was the first true reality show in criminal history. Cameras were planted inside the courtroom, and Ted Bundy, the serial killer, became the star of the show. Dissatisfied with his public defenders, he once again decided to represent himself. He strutted around the courtroom in a pressed suit, shined shoes, and occasionally a bow tie. He joked with witnesses, flashed smiles at the judge, and acted as if he were hosting a cocktail party rather than fighting for his life against a murder charge. But the strangest spectacle was found in the gallery. Young, beautiful women, bearing a haunting resemblance to his victims, waited in lines for hours just to get a seat. They sent the killer love letters. They were mesmerized by Ted's charisma and good looks, refusing to believe that this charming man could be a monster who dismembered women. The peak of this insanity occurred while he was cross-examining his girlfriend, Carol Ann Boone, whom he had called as a character witness. Ted exploited an obscure Florida law. Right there in open court, in front of the judge and jury, he proposed to Carol, and she accepted. Under the statute at the time, this constituted a legal marriage. Ted Bundy got married while on trial for murdering women, and even later conceived a child while in prison. It was the ultimate act of narcissism and a mockery of the law. But Ted Bundy's smiles couldn't stop science. The prosecution had an ace up their sleeve: Ted's own teeth. Remember the bite mark Ted left on Lisa Levy's body at the Chi Omega house? Ted's front teeth were crooked and chipped, creating a highly distinct pattern. In court, forensic odontologist Dr. Richard Sauveron overlaid a large transparency of Ted's teeth onto a photo of the wound on the victim. A hush fell over the courtroom. It was a perfect match. This charming man's teeth were his signature. Ted Bundy's face crumbled. He realized the game was up. Judge Edward Cowart read the verdict: guilty. The sentence: death by electrocution. In words that made history, Judge Cowart addressed Ted directly. "You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer, and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself." It was the most polite death sentence ever handed down. Ted Bundy fought on death row for 10 years to overturn his conviction. But finally, in January 1989, he ran out of options. The execution date was set. In those final days, the arrogant, smiling man vanished. Ted Bundy was terrified. To buy time, he started talking. He called for detectives and confessed. He revealed the locations where he had buried severed heads. He confessed to killing 30 women, though FBI experts and detectives believe that when he whispered, "add a digit," he was implying his victim count could be over 100. In his final interview, he tried to shift the blame to society. He blamed violent pornography in his upbringing. He wept and begged, but no one bought the crocodile tears anymore. The time for reckoning had arrived. "7 a.m., January 24th, 1989. The sun rose over Florida State Prison. But outside the prison walls, a bizarre celebration was taking place. Thousands of people had gathered, holding signs and wearing t-shirts that read, "Burn Bundy, burn," and "It's Friday." People were setting off fireworks, eagerly awaiting the moment justice would be served. Inside the execution chamber, Ted Bundy was strapped into the electric chair, grimly known by inmates as Old Sparky. He spoke his final words, "Give my love to my family and friends." Then, the switch was flipped. 2,000 volts surged through his body. At 7:16 a.m., Theodore Robert Bundy was pronounced dead. A white flag was raised over the prison to signal the execution was complete, and the crowd outside erupted in cheers. Ted Bundy was dead, but the question he left behind remains unanswered. Are monsters made, or are they born? Call to action. What do you think? Was Ted Bundy mentally ill, or was he simply pure evil? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are fascinated by true crime, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode, where we will crack open another mysterious case file.